release planning using feature points. So first question that I want to ask, so this is a little introduction about me and what I have been doing with various organizations over the last few years. You will see on the slide. Now in case you have any questions as we go forward, please feel free to put them on the question window and the chat window so that we can work out those questions a little later. Right now, because we have about 87 attendees, so I would not be able to take the questions in between. And I'm just going to also put on the webcam so that we are able to connect it a little better, so that you at least know me and whom you are talking to. So, in case you are facing any difficulty in understanding in terms of answering the questions or understanding the text, please log a question in the questions window, and I should be able to answer. In case the audio is not clear, which is the feedback I will be able to get, you may also want to log in through the phone links which have been provided, so that the voice is more clear, in addition to the slides that are being shown. So first of all, I'll discuss a little bit about the agenda that we are going to take up in this session. First, I'm going to be discuss and take you a little walk back through the principles and values of agility. Then we'll discuss the difference between traditional versus agile release planning and how the product owners face a dilemma while planning for agile projects. Once that part is over, I'm going to be focusing on different estimation units you can use so that you can estimate both your releases and projects in an effective way. So let's get started. And a lot of us always get confused, what is Agile really? So I want to talk about three key concepts here: a process, a framework, and a philosophy. Because a lot of authors and the material on the web you will find, they say Agile is a methodology. But I tend to disagree with that, because when you talk about a process or a methodology, it is purely from a perspective of that you have a set of given activities and where you have a defined output and a given input. So that means Agile is much beyond that. Now what is a framework? A framework or a process framework represents a set of best practices, a set of building blocks which you will use to create your own process. So it will give you a set of best practices, guidelines which have been derived from years of experience in the industry, so that you can utilize them in a better way for your projects or your reviews. Once you know about the framework, you would also be curious about what is a philosophy. Now, philosophy is something which is beyond just the realm of process or a set of activities. Philosophy is something that we really believe in. So this is a thought process, this is a set of values and principles which you would be able to work through. So that means when we talk about agility, it gives us a set of values and principles which we should be able to work on. So that means any process, any methodology, any set of practices which uses the agile philosophy as its base, agile values and principles as its base, is going to be an agile process. So all agile processes are necessarily iterative, but all iterative processes are not necessarily agile. So this is something that we need to understand first. That also means that if the organization or the customer is looking to double up their productivity just by saying we are agile, or just saying we can make any changes anytime, that is not the right assumption. You cannot simply say that, okay, because we are using agile, we'll be able to get the same amount of work done in less time. We can change direction anytime, or as the case might be. So and also it is not just about project management. When we talk about agility, it is a set of practices which helps you accommodate changing requirement. It helps you to improve the quality of your software in a great way, and it covers a lot of practices which are a part of it, which you can use as part of your projects. So if you see the 12 Agile principles which are covered, the key output of Agile philosophy being followed is frequent delivery, better communication among stakeholders and team members, and reflective improvements. And how do you achieve this is by face-to-face communication. It focuses on working software and having self-organized teams, which will lead to better customer satisfaction, constant pace and better work-life balance, and also technical excellence. So with these principles in mind, there were also few values which are defined which every Agile team, every Agile organization needs to follow. And if you see at the start and the top of this slide that I'm going to show you now, it is trust. So an Agile team will create trust between themselves and also between different stakeholders, customers that they are working with. Now, in a traditional release planning, it typically starts with requirements development. It starts with prototyping, running multiple mock-ups, and then working on high-level designs, working on detailed design, and then finally focusing on development. So this is a typical waterfall-based traditional release planning way. Now, if you would see this little circle, the customer support and feedback and acceptance from the customers comes too late in the cycle. What if there's a design flaw which may critically affect the system or something which the customer does not want? Now, if you are not able to detect this early and get a feedback from the customers early, this may lead to a major amount of rework as you go towards delivery of this. So that means you need to be very sure that what you are building is what the customer is looking for. So on the same lines, when Agile release planning is brought into picture, so true to the Agile philosophy and the principles of agility, Agile release planning talks about planning everywhere. So planning at a strategy level, planning at a product and release level, and planning at an iteration and daily level. Now, you are probably very familiar with daily planning. In other words, we call it the daily stand-up or daily scrum. So a lot of us there's a misconception, a lot of us confuse this with status meeting, but daily stand-up or daily scrum is also one of your planning meetings. Same way, you have your sprint or iteration planning, you have your release and product planning, and then at a portfolio level. So now I'm going to be discussing about how different levels of planning go and what is so specific in release planning that you need to take care of. Now the best way, what Scrum suggests, if you have been using Scrum as a framework, and because Scrum says you need to produce a potentially shippable output every sprint. So the best way to release in an Agile project is a release every sprint. That would obviously mean that you have to develop, deploy, integrate, regression test, and run through user acceptance test all the artifacts or all the features you have taken for that particular sprint. So in case you are able to manage that with a lot of automation, with breaking down your test cases to the right way, with breaking your stories in the right granular level, that is probably the best way to do a release. But what if it is not? What if you have multiple teams working together to combine into a release? Now this is the structure that we have been using with various customers, and if you would see it here, I have shown multiple teams working on multiple teams working on a single rhythm or a single set where they can collaborate, they can work together. If you see, those release and sprint boundaries are matched. So how this release starts is by forming a product owners council, where the product owners council is comprised of product owners or product managers from various sub teams which are part of this portfolio of products or different subsystems which form a single product. Now they run planning sprints, they work on detailing out the backlog, the portfolio level or the product level backlog in a series of sprints, which in my jargon I call it the planning sprint. Now, what the product owner council working along with the architects, the product architects, the designers, high-level designers would come up with is an ordered set of requirements, backlog, which would give you an idea about how the team should go forward and what do my release look like. Now, these requirements, these product backlog items are then divided up into different teams which are running parallelly, and the product owner for each of these teams then manages that team's backlog. Now, the development team, which is working with a particular backlog, will work along with the Scrum Masters to define the best possible way for this sprint forward and then work on their respective sprints. Obviously, they need to collaborate with each other occasionally, and for this, you use the Scrum or Scrum meetings. Now, sometimes if you have a very large project, the integration and acceptance testing may not be feasible just for a single product or for a particular uh, component. So in that case, the you have a separate team. You may have a separate team which focuses on system integration testing, which focuses on user acceptance testing. But if you notice the theme in this project, as we have been doing with in a typical sprint mode, this team also releases the part of the product or the few features from the product occasionally, which we have called here as the milestone release. Now, this milestone release is basically to get a feedback from the stakeholders and the end users. How does the complete product look like? Or if you have a multiple portfolio with multiple products, how does this portfolio of products look like? What additional features they would like to have? And then how would they take it forward from and what's the feedback they want to give to the team so that they can improve upon their features that they're going to produce. Now, to be able to achieve that, one of the key important aspects is estimations. Now, I display this little cartoon or little thought process from Dilbert on what he talks about estimations. Because this is something that I want to talk about now. So, in case we are okay with this and we have gone through this estimation little cartoon or thought process from Dilbert, now I would like to go ahead and talk about our traditional way of estimation. Now, in the traditional way of estimation, we typically focus on metric units. We focus on uh, how we have person week, person days based estimation. And this is purely based on the gut feel of the person who is providing the estimation. But we have a problem here that if and when the project is assigned to a particular team or the product starts developing, the estimations are done by astrologers and saints. Why do I call them astrologer and saints? Because the people who are estimating or the associates who are estimating at the start of the project are typically senior team leads, product architects, technical managers, and so on. Now, because of their experience, a particular problem or a requirement they may estimate to complete in 15 days. But what if the same requirement is being done by somebody who has just joined the team, somebody who is not yet very familiar with the technology or the domain? For the same requirement, would he be able to see the same or work with the same speed? And in that case, if this guy gives a 30-day estimation for the same problem, who is correct? Is the senior developer or the senior team member correct? Or is it the new developer who is correct? And also, let's say some team member joins in middle of the sprint. Then, if they have to take up the rest of the remaining work from a senior developer, Will the estimate remain the same, or will they have to change it? So, when we talk about estimations, there was a study which has been done, and this is a problem which has been ever living since the evolution of project management, that how much will my estimates deviate? How much we can expect for the project estimations to be accurate? So one of the key things that you need to know is something called as the Boehm's estimation accuracy graph. When Boehm said that when you're starting your product release or when you're starting your project, you know very little about the requirements that you're going to be working on or the product you're going to be working on. At that stage, if you're giving an estimate, this estimate by the time you reach the end of your product life cycle or release cycle, this will deviate by up to 40%. And this cone gets tighter and tighter as you go along, but there could be only one point where you can be sure, yes, my estimation is 100% correct. And as you would have guessed it right, this point is when you are actually releasing. So that means if we are just doing estimates at a personal level, if you are doing estimates in hours and weeks and days, then how can we bring our estimates closer to reality? How can we make them better? So that's why some authors have suggested the use of relative estimation. The relative estimation does not use traditional matrices for estimation. Rather, it talks about a measure of size and complexity. Now, to give you a metaphor to understand this better, think about a flyover being built. Now, traditionally, if you would have seen the government tender which goes out for a flyover, that is, okay, it will take about 6 months. But most of us are aware no flyover project finishes within 6 months. It may take at least 2 years to 6 years, anywhere between that. But during this time, has the size of the flyover changed, or has the size of the approach roads changed or the design changed? No. So the problem of building a flyover probably needs to see in a different light, in a different way to estimate versus the people or the time which is taken to build it. Now think about another scenario for the same flyover. There are two bidders who bid for a particular flyover. One who is a experienced construction engineer or a constructor, and another contractor who is novice, who has just entered the construction business. Now they would give different estimates for the same flyover. Why? Is it because the length of flyover is different for each one of them, or the size? No. Because their understanding of the domain, their understanding of the technology being used is different. So that means we need to separate out the problem domain estimation versus the solution domain estimation. Now, in our typical projects, and when I take this metaphor back to our projects, what is a problem domain estimation and what is a solution domain estimation? Now, when we talk about a problem domain estimation, it typically represents the requirements or the product backlog items that we want to estimate. Whereas the solution domain estimate is the tasks at hand. For example, I need to design, I need to create a UI, I need to create a proof of concept, I need to design a database schema. So these are the solutions or the steps to solve that problem. So typically what the experts recommend is that you use story point relative estimation to focus on the problem or the requirements, and then the tasks which are taken up by individual team members or associates are taken up by and they are estimated in hours by the respective task owners. So there's a question which I've been asked multiple times during my classes and by a lot of my customers. When we say complexity, isn't complexity experience dependent? But I would like to give the same metaphor of the flyover. When I say complexity, that you have to have an approach road which is probably 300 meters long, or it needs to curve on a particular side because there's a railway track. So the complexity will still remain the same. It does not change. Yes, how we measure it and how much time it take to solve it is what will be different. So when we talk about estimations for Scrum projects, the Estimates here measure the size and complexity of the product backlog items, size and complexity of the requirements. Now, it is imperative, it is very important that the whole team, when I say whole team, the Scrum Master, the product owner, the development team, when I say development team again, the developers, testers, architects, business analysts, everyone is involved in estimating this problem. And everyone is present while this estimation is being done, so that if the development team needs any help in terms of whether the estimate is correct, are we getting the right scoping, they have help available to get this answer. Now, if you have been using story points, probably as a product owner, as a release manager, you have already gone through this dilemma that because we say in an agile environment, the estimates are given by the team which is actually performing those tasks or which is taking up a particular backlog item. That means the estimations from a release manager perspective, from a product owner perspective is going to be coming in too late. And because story point estimation is relative, it is very dependent on the team which is taking it up. So they cannot be common and they cannot be compared across the teams. And the more problem which most of you as program managers, release managers would have been facing, that yes, agile methods and scrum say use story points, but my customers do not understand story points. So how do we solve this problem? And if you try to make some estimation and story points at a project manager, product manager level, then the same part may not be applicable for the team because their estimations might be totally different than what the team is going to be giving. So that means you need to derive different levels of estimation. One at a sprint level, which we typically in the agile jargon called as story points, and then at various levels of your backlog. Let's say we are talking about a product level. That means at a product level, we need to have a different level, different currency of estimation. If I'm talking about a sprint level or a user story level, I may be able to talk about a different level of estimation. Now this little slide here, it shows basically in case you're in a large scale project or a big release, what kind of different backlog entities can exist. So if I start from the left hand side corner of this picture, you would see that a typical organization has a portfolio of products. That means various products, various subsystems which make up the portfolio of the offerings which the organization has. Now, as the product owner and the company decides, a portfolio of products might have a theme. For example, we want to make sure our international clients are able to see the website in their local language. We want to make sure we comply to the US banking system. So these kind of things the management and the senior product management can decide for the respective product. Now this theme may be fulfilled in one particular release itself, or this theme may continue over multiple releases. Now based on this theme, the team or the product team might decide multiple product level goals. For this product, specifically within the portfolio, we want to focus on these goals. To take an example, we want to reduce the time spent by user by 10%. We want to make sure that the number of bugs or unintended errors are reduced to 1 per million hits. So these are the goals for your products. And these goals then give rise to your first level of functionality, first level of requirements, which in this jargon I am calling epics. And because epics are very large, they can continue across multiple sprints and multiple releases even. So they can be further subdivided into smaller functional items, which I have told them, which I have called them here features and epics, features and user stories. My apologies. So a Scrum team, when we typically talk about a Scrum team as an entity, it focuses on user stories. So the earlier diagram that I had shown you, where we had the product owners console and multiple teams working together. So the planning team, which is the product owners, senior developers, architects, designers, they will be working closely with the respective product owners to break down the requirements from epics to user stories, epics to granular stories. That also means it brings me to my next perspective. The epics and stories are estimated by two different set of teams. Epics are estimated typically by the product owners, senior developers, architects and so on. And user stories are estimated by the Scrum team. That also means the currency of their understanding or the unit of estimation also needs to be different so as to avoid any confusion between the management, stakeholders on whether the team is talking about one epic point or feature point or the team is talking about one story point, because these two approaches may be totally different. So when we are estimating the release backlog, as I said earlier, you have to work with the people who are actually going to build this. So the feature point or epic point estimations happen at a very high level between product owner, sometimes it may be a tech lead, technical manager and so on. And the story point of granular level estimation is done by the development team or the team of product developers, testers and so on. Another important aspect about estimations. Typically what happens in a release, the estimations which are taken at the start of the release or the project, they are typically frozen. But here, because the base information that you might have for that particular release or the epic might continue, keep on changing, you discover new things. This might continue to be, sorry, this might continue to change. So that means once the basic underlying assumptions or information changes, your estimates also need to change. And that's the reason if you want to estimate for something 6 months down the line or 9 months down the line, that may be vague or that may be something which is not useful at all. The prime reason being that whatever you estimated for 9 months down the line or 1 year down the line, that may undergo a drastic change. Right? As you discover more information about your product, about your subsystem and release. So that means we need to introduce a new currency here, which I'm going to call feature points. Now, if you guys have been using feature points or story points in your projects, you should be able to easily align with the feature point mechanism. Because feature point is a very similar relative estimation technique to story point, where what you do is you can identify two very large level requirements or two or epics as I call them from the last release, and then the requirements or epics from the current release, and estimate them relatively based on complexity and size. Now these epics from the previous release will become the reference epics for this release. Now based on this, let's say you may want to come, you come up with few numbers for your epics. You give them that my smallest and simplest epic out of these, I'm going to give them a random number of 20. Another epic 2 might get a number 40. Epic 3 might get another number 20, which is a similar size and complexity to epic number 1. So in this scenario, what would be the total size of release? We are talking about 3 epics here, 20, 40 and 20. So this would be making total of 80 epic points. So when I say total of 80 epic points, and from my previous release, previous sprint, we know that an epic worth 20 epic points was finished in 4 weeks. So that means in this release, I would take about 16 weeks to complete my whole release features. So the size of release becomes sum of all committed epics for this release. And the question is, when does this get decided? So this is not decided just at the time of the start of your release, but the team revisits these estimates, revisits the number of epics we can take up in a release periodically. And that period or that cycle is anywhere between 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on the size of your release, depending on the total duration in calendar weeks that you are running. So the next step in terms of your release planning would be to break down epics into features and then similarly estimate those features relatively. Now sometimes you might happen that the total number of feature point estimates you might have given exceeds the number of epic points. But your feature points is the latest and more detailed estimation here. So you would go back and estimate the size of your epic. That would also mean the size of your release might change. The completion of your release might also change. So a few key tips when you start working with release estimation. So first, you need to have your customers, key stakeholders, product owner as part of your release planning. You need to use planning poker estimation technique, which is depicted on this particular slide. And then you should be able to look at the yesterday's weather and see in the previous release the same team completed so many feature points or so many epic points. So let's say they completed 80 feature points in a sprint of 4 weeks. So if I have to complete 200 feature points, it would take me 10 weeks to finish this. You would also use some of the drag factors, or as we call them, the buffers in a normal word, in case you are not clear about your requirements or you are not clear about the solution that you are providing. So once you have had your base estimate for your requirements for your product backlog items, you can add drag factors as shown in this particular slide. If you know the requirements very well, if you know how to implement it, then we don't need any buffers. But in case the requirement is not very clear or the deployment is very complicated, you may add a buffer of up to 20%. In case you have very less idea about what the scope, the requirement is and so on, your estimate may vary by up to 60%. Even things like availability of meeting room, multiple teams working together, they all take also a drag on uh, the estimates. So that means after you have given your raw estimates, you should look at the raw effort, add those complexity and drag factors, and then give the final forecast to the product owner and the stakeholders in terms of feature velocity, number of features, number of epics we will be able to produce in the next 2 weeks. So this particular number or metric, number of epic points, number of feature points you can pick up in a particular sprint is called as the feature velocity or the epic velocity. And now, once you have the epic velocity, you know in a particular sprint, the team can complete about 2 feature points. And I've got 80 feature points to complete in this particular release. The release manager can easily tell the stakeholder this will take us about 40 weeks to complete. So just to summarize what we have talked till now, when we talk about epic level or very high level estimations, this is typically done by the product owners, product architects and senior SMEs. When we talk about the medium level estimations and feature estimations, they may be done by tech leads, test architects, senior engineers and so on. And when it comes story point estimations, it is done by the development teams. Now using feature point estimation technique, you can also track the progress of your release or project. You can also see if I complete just one story in a particular sprint, how much is the progress that is being made for the overall release. And just to explain this slide to you a little, if you see we had a project A which was consisted of 3 epics, epics A, B and C. As I said earlier, the total project size is sum of your epic size. So 40 feature points, 60 feature points, and 20 feature points. Now, when we talk about features, again, which is a subdivision from the epic level, you would see epic B is a sum of two features, B and C, which is each worth 40 feature points and 20 feature points. Now, if you come down, you would be kind of intrigued by why are there different numbers here? Why they don't match up to a feature level? Now, the plain and simple reason for that being that story point estimation is given by a different set of people and feature point by a different set of team members. So the currency need not be same. Their understanding of what one means may also not be the same. So how we still track the progress of our release? So if you see I'll run a little illustration here on how we can track this progress. So in a particular sprint, the team completed story number B, which was worth 50 story points. So in that case, because the total number of story points was 100, we have completed 50% of feature A. Now 50% of feature A means 20 feature points. Now if it is 20 feature points, how much is the total project we have been able to complete? 20 out of 120 feature points, which is approximately 16.7%. Now suppose a scenario, if one of the customer comes to you, I want this new requirement to be done. Can you give me an estimate of how much time it will take? So this scenario, where if you see here, Epic D was added, which is again worth 20 story points. Now the total size of your project has updated from 120 feature points to 140 feature points. And your total project completion or release completion has gone down to 14%. Now based on this data, the product owner and release manager can forecast to the stakeholder that maybe we'll take 2 more sprints or we need 5 more team members to complete this. So I just because we had a small amount of time, so in this 45 minutes I just gave you a small example of how we can plan our releases by using feature points and relative estimation techniques. Now by no means, and probably I'm sure you would have a lot of questions that will be coming to your mind. By no means this is a complete information and it needs more elaboration. But we have bigger courses and detailed courses which help you understand this in a better way, and we would soon also be with you guys, sitting with you in terms of helping you with this estimation. Now there has been a question raised which from Siddhanath that he wants to know more about an example of sprint, epic, feature and story points. So just to give you this example, uh, let's take up a particular release. As I said earlier, we have these 3 epics and 4 epics which are part of this. Now in the first release, we took up 3 epics we'll complete, and these were divided into 4 features or 4 sub features. Though the name is little wrong on the slide, these are feature A, B, C and D. Now a sprint is the smallest possible cycle of development where you can produce a potentially shippable output. So in a typical sprint, the team will take up 2 to 3 stories from their backlog which they can complete. So let's assume in this particular scenario, these team take up story number A, B and C for completion in sprint number 1. And story number D, E and F were completed in sprint 2. Now the typical duration of a sprint is 1 to 4 weeks. So it may be 2 weeks, it may be 3 weeks, it may be 4 weeks, depending on the size of your release, the complexity of the items that you're working on, and the uncertainties. Whereas when I talk about a release, you may release every sprint, or you may release every quarter, you may release every half year as per your company's schedules. So this is the difference between a release and a sprint in this scenario. And about Epic's features and story as said, so Epic is the very large level requirement, feature is a middle level requirement, and Story is a base level requirement. Okay. Now, if you talk about so another question which is coming from Bhaskar and from Siddhanath again. When we talk about best practices in terms of cross-validation, it is strongly recommended that story points may not be used for comparing teams, but one of the important matrices that you can use is something called as acceleration. Now, acceleration uh, is basically the rate of change of velocity, how the team is improving on their previous work. Last sprint or last couple of sprints, they were producing 25 story points. Is this remaining stable as they go along, or because they are now getting better hang of technology, better hang of domain, they would be able to take up instead of 25, maybe 28 or 30 story points. So as the team goes along, it should gradually be able to improve. So acceleration is a very right metric to be able to pick it up. Now, typically, from the industry perspective, team should show 5 to 10% improvement every sprint or over if you over a group of 2 to 3 sprints. So this is one practice you can use. Now coming to Siddhanath's question, uh, the story point estimation technique and the relative estimation technique is something which was coined by two gentlemen, Mike Cohen and Ron Jeffries. But as agile projects have grown, as the use of Scrum has grown, these have more or less become familiar terms in the industry. Though, another disclaimer here, another caveat here, story points or feature points is not the only way to estimate Scrum projects. You can still use your own traditional methods, traditional techniques, uh, but you can still work out similar mechanisms which allow the team together to estimate, which allow for certain degree of failure and skill set to be taken into account, and then you can take it forward from there. So team, what I'm doing now is, if you have any questions, please put them on the questions window. You'll see a little link on your chat, on your webinar window where it says you can raise questions. I'm going to also enable the chat for this particular part. Because we have only about 10 more minutes to go. So I will open the audio for 5 minutes, and because we have, I said, about 94 participants in this webinar now, I may not be able to take up all the questions. So if you can put it on the your chat window, if I'm not able to answer it in next 10 minutes, I will definitely write a reply to all of you answering those questions. So we are open to accepting the questions now. And I also, because just to preserve the bandwidth, I'm putting on the video now. It has nice been seeing you guys, and hopefully we can meet sometime soon. So I have a question coming in from Gaurav, that why stories are not adding up to the features in the slide that is on live now. Now, as I said earlier, Gaurav, uh, the the feature points and epic points are given by a different set of team members, which is typically product architects, SMEs, senior developers, and so on. And the user story points or story points are given by the development team members, which comprises of developers, testers, business analysts, and so on. Now, because these are two different teams, they typically use a different currency. And you cannot have a direct formula which says, okay, one feature point is equal to 20 story points. Because for a development team, what they mean by the simplest and smallest may be totally different from what an architect and a senior developer or a technical manager may say. This is the smallest and simplest. Second, your features are something which may encompass multiple sprints, or which may be comprised of multiple stories. And these stories may not be taken up by just one team. So part of the feature may be worked upon by team number A, and part of this feature may be worked upon by team number B. And because their thinking process is different, so you cannot simply sum up the stories and the features. Okay. So hope that answers the question. Uh, no, because there is a question by Biju here that I am getting. So, are there any resource number constraints in each story as a standard? Now, I typically want to give an example here, Biju, which would probably help you in understanding this. Because you don't have a direct relationship between a story point and the number of team members who can be a part of it. Why? Because typically on a user story, there might be multiple team members working. Sometimes there's a UI developer and a Java guy working along with a test engineer and documentation. For others, you may not require documentation, but simply a UI to be developed and to be tested. So from that perspective, you cannot have a direct relation. But what you can have is what is called as boxing estimation. So that means, let's say you have a box of, which measures 1 meter by 1 meter. It's a volume of 1 square meter. Now in this, you can fill marbles, or you can fill cotton, or you can fill water. Right? Though the size of the box remains the same, depending on what you are putting in there, the total weight of this might change. So you might not be able to put 1 kg cotton in there, so you might put 10 kgs of marble. So you cannot have a direct relationship between resource numbers and user stories. So, and we can explain in detail maybe in an offline chat video. Now, I have a next question from Dharani Kumar Shankar, who says, what is the percentage of success rate in Agile methodology estimation compared to traditional method of estimation? I want to give a little metaphor here, which I have been using in my trainings. So typically, when you get your house painted, you get your, a painter comes to you and he would go around the house and he would give an estimate. This would take about a week and about 10,000 rupees. Now, if you have noticed, in 90% of the cases, these painters are typically on the spot with their estimation of within 10% deviation. Whereas, if you would go to our, and this is the data from PMI now I talk about, the average project deviation is about 25%. So who is a better estimator then? Painters, right? Even though they are not literate enough and so on. But if you see the difference here, it is the painter who himself is estimating what work he is going to do. So if your team is estimating for themselves, if the team has been working themselves and estimating, then it is easy. Then the project success rate has been much higher. But if we have saints, astrologers, senior team members only giving the estimates, then whether you use traditional method of estimation, whether you use agile estimation techniques, the success rate is still about 60 to 70%. Okay. Uh, I have got about 5 minutes. I was just thinking if you have any questions on the audio bridge also, so that I can hear some of your wonderful voices. Anyone who is not able to type in would like to ask the questions on the audio bridge. No? Okay. Did I hear something? No. Okay. So if you have any questions about release planning and estimation, please do feel free to uh, write to us at info@agiveta.com. This was the link you would have also got in your email ID, where we will be happy to answer all these questions. Uh, Now, I want to answer one last question given the time that we have, which has come in from Saurabh Dwivedi. So Saurabh asked, do one need to commit about the release after the story point estimations? Now, commit is a very interesting word because commitment is what Mr. Salman Khan gives. Right? Right. But because we are in projects, even though we say we have all the requirements and so on, the project environment, the information that you might have might keep on changing. So in 2013, when Ken Schwabel and Jeff Sutherland, the authors of Scrum, wrote the Scrum Guide, they made a little change to this commitment part. They called it forecast. Now, what's the difference between a forecast and a commitment? Commitment means, as I said, as Mr. Salman cares, come what may, I have to do this. Right? But the forecast means, based on the current scenario, I am committing to 25 story points. But if the scenario changes, this may vary. So after every sprint, after every story point estimation, the team and the product owner might work back again to update their release estimations, update their project estimates, see, okay, where are we now? Are we on track? Do we need to delete something from our release scope? Do we need to add few more team members? So this becomes an exercise which happens every 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So release planning happens every 2 weeks to 4 weeks now. Okay. So we have time for one last question. Who is going to give me that? So in fact, I've got two. So I have two questions which have come. One from Biju. So Biju says, when you estimate a sprint, how much buffer should we keep to accommodate for the backlogs from the previous sprint? And another comes from Senthil. Senthil says, does Agile have different approaches for development and maintenance projects? So I'm going to answer the first one first from Biju on how much buffer should we keep. Now, think about an abacus. So Vijay, this is for you. Think about an abacus which the kids play, and think about your sprint time and sprint release. So when we talk about a sprint time and sprint release, the team needs to invest into PPF. PPF is not probably what you would have thought your public provident fund, but past, present, and future. So the team should definitely keep out some time from their sprint capacity to clean up their past sins, or as we lovingly call them, bugs. The team should keep away some time for thinking about future, which includes backlog refinement, which may include mock-ups, which may include any trainings which need to be done by the team members, and so on. And then allocate time for creating the new requirements. And why I call it as abacus is because in first sprint you might have 50 hours put in for bugs or the past sins. In the next sprint, because a lot of inflow of bugs, you might make it to 100 and reduce the number of story points you are producing or the number of actual features you are producing. This would also give the team an idea uh, if they are spending too much time on fixing bugs, that they better need to improve the quality so that actually they can produce new features. So I hope that answers the question. Now I'm trying to answer what Senthil Mohan has said. Because as I said, Agile is a philosophy, so there are multiple techniques, there are multiple practices which are available which may help you. But based on your project, based on your context, you may use different set of practices. So Scrum is typically applicable when we are talking about team management and project management. If you have a pure play maintenance project, you may use a combination of Kanban plus Scrum, or you may use Battlefield Agility, which is another framework that we have been promoting. Or you may simply say we are going to use a small scale Scrum. So your Scrum may become only a 1 week sprint. So yes, the practices would be different between greenfield and brownfield development projects as well as support and maintenance projects. Good. So team, with this, we have come to our allocated time for the sprint. The recording of this webinar would also be available on the Ajivita YouTube channel. So my colleague Pooja would shortly send you a mail detailing out all these details and on my email ID, so that if you have any questions, you can talk to me anytime and you can write into me anytime. So let me say thank you very much to all of you, and especially to Bhaskar and the team from the CSC CTO office for helping us arrange this. And I look forward to seeing you soon, pretty soon, in one of our webinars and one of our conferences. Thank you very much. Have a nice day ahead. Mhm. Mhm.